Hi, my name is Andy, and I'm going to talk to you about research and qualitative research specifically, and how you do content analysis with your qualitative content. This is because I have students who always seem to struggle, and there wasn't very much good advice around, and I thought doing a YouTube video would be a good trick. Just in case you think I'm some desk-bound nerd, this is a picture of me in Minnesota somewhere, but I live and work in South Africa, so let's get on with it, shall we? When we're doing research, we're generally concerned with a phenomenon, and there are three ways we can argue that you generally do research. This is based on work by Michael Myers, who's in Auckland in New Zealand. Go there, check him out. He's got one of the most frequently referenced websites dealing with qualitative research. Like me, he's in information systems research, but there's no reason why these ideas shouldn't be more generally applicable. Let's get to it. There is positivist, there is interpretive, and there is critical research. Michael's way of explaining this, in my interpretation at least, is very simple. Positivist research is when you have properties or variables you know you can measure, you go out and measure them, you do statistical inference analysis on your measurements, and prove or disprove your hypothesis. Well, that's easy, isn't it? Well, is it useful is the question. If we're doing some research to investigate people, and we have a hypothesis that tall people are heavier than short people, we just need to go out and find a few people, measure their height, measure their weight, and do our graphing and analysis. But, what do we learn? I'm more interested in the situation where we don't know what we're looking for. We don't have variables and properties that we can identify. We want to go and talk to people and see what they say, and draw our understanding of meaning from their words. So the interpretive method will use interviews, case studies, documents. Ethnography means that it's working with people a lot, and because we're concerned with meaning, semiotics and hermeneutics, the theories underlying the meaning of words, signs and symbols, and language, it's all potentially important, but depends on the level of your research. The positivist work, it says interviews here, but generally questionnaires would be used. Interviews may give you statistical data, case studies may give you statistical data, but I would think 99% of the positivist work is done with questionnaires. So let's look at the third option, critical, which I don't actually do personally, but my simple view of critical research is that you observe people's actions, you develop a history of what they have done, and you try and learn about the constraints under which they work. So constraint theory goes with critical methods, and at the end of the day, you're not talking to them, you're not interviewing them, you're just observing. Now I'll probably be pilloried by my friends for making it so ludicrously simple. Let's add in some big words. The interpretive paradigm involves epistemology, which is what we know and how we know what we know, because we're trying to develop our knowledge and developing new things that we understand better than when we started. The positivist approach is phenomenological, because it has it starts with a verifiable belief that we can prove from observing the external world. I should say by measuring the external world. In terms of writing up about these things, you need to know that let's concentrate on positivist and interpretive. The positivist is objective, but the interpretive is subjective. The positivist would give you results that should be generalizable, so you're very concerned with getting a good representative sample. The interpretive research is not necessarily generalizable at all. It's specific to an organization, or to a department, or a group of people. The positivist is predictive, and it takes the outside or etic view. The interpretive is explanative, quite different. It takes the internal or the emic view. Positivist research tends to work with groups, that's called nomothetic research, and interpretive research tends to work with the individual, which makes it idiographic. There's some big words for you. What does it look like? Well, what you have to do is go and organize your interviews, organize your focus groups, and organize your source documents, and you'll know more about what you're likely to be able to do than I can guess from here. Out of these three principal sources, we're looking for, I think, text. Yeah, I know people do work with videos and other non-textual sources, but as soon as people speak, you're probably going to want to transcribe what they have said and to make notes from the focus groups. Of course, with focus group meetings, you're quite likely to get graphical output, and I'm not quite sure how I'd advise you to deal with that now. But we need to pre-process our source material and create plain text files from our transcriptions, our documentation, and so on. At the same time, of course, even before you go and talk to people or look for documents, you'll probably read the previous academic literature. And out of that reading you may come up with what we call a priori categories, the categories, the ideas we're looking for that you develop before you start your research. When you've got some material to work with, you apply the categories, you break down the text into workable chunks that represent some kind of single point of argument. Now we're going to look at that in just a minute, don't worry about what I mean. The issue is that when you then look at the text, you end up finding all sorts of categories that you hadn't thought of. We call these a posteriori, at least I do, because they happen after the event. So examining the chunks minutely leads to all sorts of stuff you hadn't thought of in the beginning. So what do I mean by chunks? A typical text from an interview might look like this. We see mention of ShopRite, which is a well-known retailer in South Africa, but this is not an interview with ShopRite, it's with one of the partners of ShopRite. And if we just make it a little bit bigger, you might be able to see it. Incidentally, do make sure you're playing this video on full screen, otherwise you will not see the detail, and it needs to be, you click on that little button down in the bottom right hand corner. Okay, so here's the text. Let's just have a look now. We've got an introduction which deals with the words thus. You know, dealing with the likes of ShopRite, and in terms of the way we handle clients, the whole idea is to look at their strategy, and that in terms of our broader strategy of going in and supporting our clients as they expand into the rest of Africa. And obviously there are always going to be challenges because the markets are never the same. Everyone is slightly different, everyone is unique, and if we are at various stages in various countries, at that point the speaker goes on to talk about Nigeria and other countries. That seems like a break point. So this looks like the first chunk we're going to want to work with, and it's got some nice stuff. Do you see a reference to a well-known shopping chain? Some activities here, strategy twice, expansion. We need some categories to work with. We're looking for ideas, and let's suppose that before we started our research, from our reading of the literature, we decided that we're going to look for retailers, we're going to look for evidence of service operations, and strategy and strategic thinking, expansion, similarities and differences, because that's what strategy is all about. Challenges, we're always looking for the problems, aren't we? And we've been reading the stages theory, so we want to look for stages, you know. We've been reading Parasorum and Berry and Zethamel, so we got the service model in mind. And so it goes on, you know how research works. Retailer, ShopRite. Service, we handle clients. The strategy, well, it's the retailer strategy, and it's the partner strategy. Expansion, there's the key word on expansion, and then he starts by saying the likes of ShopRite, which suggests similarity, but comes on to say how very different everybody is. Everyone is slightly different, and that's the challenge. And so we end up with a nice reference to stages, which will suit us very well if we want to have a few pages in our discussion about the stages of retailers moving into Africa. That's what this is all about. So there you are. Let's pick another chunk. I'm just going to skip over the bit in the middle because that's not so interesting. This third section here, you touched earlier on location, says our speaker. Those operations are ideally suited to a mall type of environment, large footprint, poster corner shops. It's a big place, they've got parking there. They want a lot of people to come through, and I think it's one of the biggest challenges. It's not quite clear why it's a challenge. Now here we find some of the things we're looking for. Location, well, the interviewer mentioned location. It obviously had come out in conversation. This guy uses the word operations twice, which gives it some significance. And obviously we came in thinking about strategy. He talked to a businessman, he wants to talk about operations. Large footprint. Size is a matter of concern to him. Service, well, a small example. They've got parking there. That's an example of a service. Not quite the same as consultants handling clients, but there you go. Expectations. They want a lot of people to come through. Well, it's more an objective, but let's call it they expect a lot of people to come through, and your challenge there. So what we find is there are some things that we are looking for that occur frequently and repeatedly, some things we discover on the way through. The idea of trying to plan out all our categories at the start, well, I'm telling you, usually we end up with something of a mixture. Now, see how service and challenge occur in both chunks. Well, that's how it happens. We suddenly have the idea that the number of times something occurs in our chunks might be important. If it comes up many times, it's certainly going to be important. Let's have a look at some real data and see what happens. So out of the analyzer, I'll be showing you in a moment, we see this distribution of, I think it's 72, 73 categories. And at the top end, we've got the very large number of references to location, where you saw Nigeria, you saw Lesotho, and so on in the chunk just a moment ago. The context of strategy, that was a nice way of catching difficult things to deal with, because people obviously spend a lot of time talking about the context which drives them to do what they're doing. But on this side here, we got a lot of categories that are not really mentioned much at all. So two issues. We need to look carefully at the low frequency categories and see if we can ignore them or combine them or bring them into some other thing called others. If we saw an accumulative distribution here, we'd be looking for where the curve comes towards the top here. On the left hand side, the other main issue is, do we need to break down what we mean by location, what we mean by context, and go and recode at a lower level and get a finer resolution on what the hell is going on here. So that's a typical result. The colours in the bars predictably represent the 9 interviews, and you can choose to look at only 1 or 2 or 3 at a time if you want to. So summarising, in this particular study we found that location turned out to be very frequent. So we can see what is to be regarded as important and what is not, but what's the whole story? That's not really the whole story. Let's go and look abstractly now. We've got a bundle of things we call chunks, and we've got a list of things we call categories. Now then, putting the control in place that we need, we recognise this is a many-to-many relationship. Now, I've done database design, and whenever you get a many-to-many relationship, you've got to deal with it. So what we need is a device in the middle here that points to one category and one chunk, and that's an instance of categorizing something in a chunk. So only when we've got this linkage will we have full control, and then we can start counting every which way. If you ever try to do this kind of analysis with Excel, you'll know how much trouble you can get into very quickly, because you need this structure, and that's why I really think a database is a better vehicle for dealing with what we call denotata or denotatums. It's a Latin word. Schutz is the guy who first wrote about this in my understanding, and I've got a reference back to 1959. Well, I love these old seminal references personally. You might be smiling with me now, but why don't you, if you're a student, why don't you go and find your supervisor and say with a big smile, yeah, I found this reference from 1959. Watch them go pale, see what they say. But guys, this is a seminal reference, very referenceable, and I do it shamelessly. I'm going to give you a more recent reference later on. This is how it works. The denotatum is just a little field in the database that points to the retailer on this side and the instance of a retailer on the other. In the second case, we're pointing to the idea of service, and there was a mention of a service there. In the third case, we talk about strategy and point at something to do with strategy. The fourth one is also from strategy, so it's another instance of strategy. We're still in the same chunk. Then in another chunk here, we pick up on the idea of retailer again. That would make 2 now, but it's pointing to some chunk we can't see. Finally, this reference to strategy on this side points to yet another chunk we can't see. I just have an eye to the quantities we're dealing with here. In 9 interviews we have, I think it was 500 chunks. We'll have a look in a moment. and we're dealing with up to 72 categories. This is not a small problem, and keeping a grip on the denotata is not a small thing. You have to do it. So when we've got this control, we can start bouncing around in the data. Let's have a look now and see what we can do with the analyzer. Here are the main functional areas. We're doing browsing. All the analysis and all the coding is done. If we look at the sources, we see there are 16 interviews. Do you see 16 interviews? And we're looking at Fashion Manager 1 in Fashion Store number 1, whatever. Here are chunks. 58. Do you see? It says 58. Here's a mention of Zambia. And my mouse is not going. Here's a mention of Zambia again. Let's pick up on this one here. In East Africa, in Kenya and Uganda, we got into a discussion with some people, possibility of franchising. Well, the first thing that jumps out at me is the word franchising, because franchise or franchising, that's the denotatum, and it's an allusion to the category which we call mode of entry. The other stuff, discussion with some people, that's formulation of strategy, and we're trying to learn about formulation of strategy. So by double clicking here we can either go and see the franchising denotatum, but look, it just points to the one chunk and the one category, so it's not actually very, very interesting. If we click on the mode of entry category, this is much more interesting. It brings up quite a complex form which I'm going to have a little bit of trouble with because it doesn't fit on this screen, but here we have another place to go and scroll through all of the chunks that evidence this idea of mode of entry, and there are 56 of them. And what we find is that there are no children here, so this tells us that this category is at a fairly low level, the bottom level of our hierarchy. What do I mean by that? Let's go and have a look at the hierarchy for a moment. I'll just clean up this screen a little bit. In the browsing we have a thing called tree view, and this allows us to look at the organization of categories in a structured way. And what we have done is taken the 70 odd categories and organized them into 6 main groups. Change management, which divides down into 5 things. Operational, a lot of stuff there. Implementation, this further expands for some reason. Strategy, products. You see how all of the detail is now managed in a much more effective way through the inclusion of this tree view. It's a strict hierarchy, so something will only ever appear in this tree view in one place. But that's not actually how the analyzer is able to work. It can work in a networked way, so that if we take everything, we're looking at it in a more structured way now. The things that we saw under everything are here again now. And if we want to look, we looked at strategy. Let's dig down a little bit. What was the one that split down there? Was it product? Yes, product divides down. And strategy is now up at the top, products in the middle, so this is the upper level, the one we're looking at, and here's the lower level there. Let's go back to the hierarchy view. This takes a moment because it's doing a huge amount of work for us. Now we can do a little bit of trickery here. We want to look at how this product detail breaks down. We just click here and it pulls up the product and shows us that there are 12 references to component of product, there's 1 reference to certification, and there's no reference to food. Is that interesting? Well, let's go to strategy. Have a look at strategy. There we are, here's the strategy. It's a bit richer now. So we're getting an impression about the distribution of the children categories of the parent that we call strategy. If we want the evidence of strategy, it's all there waiting for us now. There are 29 chunks that will help us to tell stories about strategy. These charts are useful. Access has got great facilities. We can go into the pivot chart. It is a pivot chart. If you ever wondered what is a pivot chart, you're looking at one. And we can select only some of the things if we want to look at some of the things only. And some of the other features of the analyzer give you a lot more control, and we can drop in filters and things if we want to. I'm going to pass on the rest of that detail just for now. Okay, I've just shown you how we can navigate up and down the hierarchy. We use this thing to drive, and we can use the tree view also. and this is complicated, but that's where you'll spend some time. Okay, let's tidy up a little bit and bring up the control panel, and let's go back to the presentation. Right, so you had a look at the analyzer. Of course, the purpose of our research is to try and find the themes that will actually be interesting to talk about and write about. So in this retailing example, we've picked up on location. Perhaps there's an argument here that the way these guys see location needs to be unpacked, and we need to dig into all of that data, invent typologies for location, and start to tell stories about this country, that country, the east of Africa, the west of Africa. You can see how it goes. Some countries are predominantly Muslim, some are predominantly Christian, some are not particularly predominantly anything, and so there's all sorts of patterns yet to be found. And the theme, therefore, is something that's going to represent some kind of conclusion of our work. The ideas that come from our research, not from other people's work. And that could be the main feature of the later pages in our thesis, or the conclusions in our journal article. Now, the ontology word is a word, it's used a lot, but not many people talk much about it. I like the word because, once again, I can appeal to understanding of database design. Because if you look up about ontology, if you Wikipedia into the ontology page, it's defined as a representation of something, a reality, using entities and the relationships between entities. And that gets me excited, because that's what database design is all about. The parallel with research is very strong in my view. What we've discovered using this analyzer is that a key analysis step is to look for the frequently occurring pairs of categories in the chunks of text. We saw in our very crude little example that service came up twice, and I think challenge came up twice. The fact that these pairs are coming up together, service and challenge, there must be a connection. Well, the data that we've been illustrating with produces this kind of a result. Well, perhaps we'll have a look at a better representation of this from the actual data. But it briefly, at this stage, it's telling us at the bottom of the diagram here that context of strategy and location comes up very frequently, 81 times. I'm actually going to go back in and I'm going to show you. Let's do 25. Let's bring up the chart now. It's a bit better. We can read the words on this one, I think, can't we? Can you read those words? Context of strategy and location, 81 times. Location and outcome, that's that 52 times. These categories, location, stakeholder, outcome, they're all over the place down here. We're finding now very clear potential relationships between this thing called context and stakeholder and outcome and location, and this needs investigation. And so from this pairs analysis we begin to develop a very much clearer view of what is coming out of the research. So let's close that down. And the next area for investigation is the ontological view. Now, I have to tell you that the ambition I hold is to do a graphical version of this. You know those lovely tag clouds that you get? Some of them are dynamic tag clouds. I'd love to be able to do that, but this is Visual Basic, folks. Visual and Basic it is. I beg your pardon. Basic it is, Visual it is not. Not in that sense anyway. So what we have got in the analyzer is a sort of navigation tool. It helps us to investigate some of that detail a little bit more particularly. So let's go into the ontology. Okay, we're live in the analyzer again now. When it opens up, it goes for the alphabetic list. Attitude is the first one in the list, I think. Now what we're really interested in is which are the pairs that are most frequent. Do you remember context of strategy and location? 81 occurrences. Okay, context of strategy and location. There you have it. And this is quite rich. Now what this is telling you is that these two relate to each other. We can change these words and we can say context of strategy is determined by location. We can say context of strategy affects the choice of location. Do you see? The key interrelationship only comes from reading the words, and here they are. we've got our 81 instances waiting for us to read them down there. But let's look at where it goes next, because context, we find, is related to these things: challenges, competition, attitude, brand and strategy. Well, let's just see what strategy and context of strategy have to talk to us about. Well, it's giving us no instances there. That's interesting. Let's just go back. Got to go back to here. Okay, brand 15, and let's go back to the top again. If we go this side, the location goes to quite a range of stuff here. Location goes to opportunity. So here we are. We can see a selection of, I think I need to do a refresh here. Just bear with me a moment. No. Okay, this number's not coming up. Let's not get distracted by a small thing that doesn't work here now. The way in which the network of relationships operates is available to us here now. All you have to do is click and you get the linking between the all possible combinations that have any evidence, and the evidence is presented to you down here. So expectations relates to location. Yeah, okay, he's talking about looking at male, female, children's fashion, smart or casual. People who are 30 plus all dressed more formally, can manipulate for our stores how much formal and how much casual. So this is all about expectations in different places. You know, what you sell in one place you don't sell in another. Okay, you get the idea. You get the idea. So the analyzer is more or less worked through. Bear in mind that the channel of YouTube stuff I've got for you takes you through this much more carefully. And in terms of wrapping up the presentation, what we have found is there are three fundamentally different ways to do research. They're positivist, interpretivist and critical. My personal feeling is that most of the management research that we need to do is interpretive, because we're not actually sure what we're looking for. And we need to hear what people have to say. For me, management is, uses numbers, but management is about fashion and fancy. I think that thirdly, text is the fundamental medium we're working with. I do acknowledge that visual, graphical and video data may be important. There may be a way of transcribing some of what you have there into words. But the key steps in most cases with text is to divide the text down into chunks and work with our increasing list of categories, and using the denotatum idea to code the data, and the analyzer that I've shown you working here helps you to do that. I think counting gets us started. Counting the denotata gives a very crude but useful initial view, and counting the co-occurring pairs is the beginning of the development of themes, and well, I'm still thinking about this ontological thing. Okay, if you want some help from the world of textbooks, this is probably the most commonly used book, Corbin and Strauss. Highly recommended. I've got an old edition which I reference in this way here. On Amazon, one of the reviews says how excellent it is, especially at the graduate level. But there is another freebie running around. Bhattacharjee has let loose a PDF, which is actually a 70-80 page book. It may be longer. It's not a small piece of work, and he summarizes a lot of what Corbin and Strauss say, and it's a free download. So where exactly it comes from, it seems to be the Global Text Project. Personally, I got it when the man visited my university. That's the way the world works, isn't it? I wish you good luck and bon voyage. Finally, if you want to get involved with the analyzer and track some of the more timely comments that are made about all of this, that's the URL for a Wikispaces where we link to the download facility and to the help and installation and use of advice, and where we can have discussions. It's very new, but if you want to go there, I think you have to ask me to join, and we will talk. Good luck. Thanks for listening. Bye.